I invite you to close your eyes and reflect for just a moment on the rich portrait of Edyth that Maggie has just so skillfully and artfully painted. Maybe an image of Edyth will arise in you, a memory of when you have seen her face with that smile, sometimes mischievous, sometimes joyful. Maybe you can see the energy in her eyes, that twinkle behind those songs and visits to Disney. Maybe you can sense the inner joy that she is feeling simply at your presence. Now, I know that each of you has an image like this, a dear, beloved image of Edyth. And I want you to know that every time I feel that image arising in me, I find myself leaning forward because I can't hear what she's saying. Now, I know that she is saying something really important because, it's Edyth. I bet some of you have had that experience too. I've got a friend that Edyth loved so much she made him buy hearing aids just so he could pay more attention. But you do lean in because you know she does have something to say. And so often what she says could be translated as, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Now, Edyth knows her Bible, not only in the Christian version, but also as the Tanakh. And she knows that these words have a rich tradition. They refer in the 6th chapter of John not only to what has just happened to the disciples. Jesus has just fed the 5,000. He has just walked on water and appeared before his disciples, telling them that it is I. Yet these images also come from Exodus. The Israelites were fed manna in the desert, bread that kept them alive. Yahweh described Yahweh itself as I am that I am, or I will be what I will be. All of this is wrapped up in this one phrase, I am the bread of life. Or if you will, love is the bread of life. And I know that you have seen the same image that I have seen because I have seen it on your faces too. I have seen it on the faces of this family as they gathered in December to sing Christmas carols and Hanukkah tunes and songs. I've seen it on their faces as they have all, 35 of them, marched out into the world as responsible for the presence of God as Edyth was, each ministers in their own right and unique way. I have seen it in the faces of children at Children's Chapel who just jump and sing Onward Christian Soldiers. Not because they agree with the theology of it, but because Edyth loved it, and that was enough. I have seen it in the faces of those who sat on what Edyth affectionately referred to as the grandmother's pew or the granny pew, who seemed, I promise you, to have known each other before they were born. They didn't even need to talk to each other, they just knew. I've seen it on the faces of brides and more recently grooms who have come back from Charles Willis saying, you'll never believe what Edyth picked out for us. It was perfect, beyond what we could have imagined. I have seen these images of delight come from having seen the image of delight in Edyth, from having leaned into Edyth as she leaned into us in order to make God known to us. Because see, as Edyth leaned in, year after year after year, what happened was that she grew smaller, not just physically, but spiritually, allowing the God in her to grow bigger. She receded so that God could expand, and so what we saw in Edyth's face was the holy, the presence of the divine. And what she was doing is calling that same presence, that same holiness out of us. It was deep calling to deep. And that was Edyth's ministry. While we were out wondering if the glass was half full or half empty, Edyth was just happy to have a glass. And noting that there was water in it. And if you hung around her long enough, you too began to develop that sense of the presence of God as you began to grow smaller and the God in you began to grow larger. That was Edyth's ministry. I am the bread of life. Love is the bread of life. Lean into it, Edyth seemed to be saying. Now, I heard a tale that I was told was from an ancient rabbinic story, that when you arrive on the doorstep of heaven, you are greeted by the divine not with questions about how much good you did or what wrong you may have done, what might have been, or the opportunities missed. The Holy One simply looks at your face, leans in, if you will, to see who you are, and then tries to determine how much of the divine can be seen in you, how much of God's self God sees in you. Now, I have this image of Yahweh greeting Edyth, of leaning in, and then have to lean in a little bit more to hear exactly what she has to say. And yet, in the image of her face, seeing God's own reflection like a mirror, the presence of the divine, of the holy, of the presence of God, that all of us have seen and grown closer to God because we know it's there. This is Edyth's gift to us. Love is the bread of life. And we have her to thank for our experiential awareness of what that phrase actually means. Amen.